In the studio with us today from Beltrami Electric, Mike Berkeland, VP of Electrification. That's a cool title, by the way.
Thank you.
Angela Lyseng, Communications Specialist with Beltrami Electric. First off, from everyone in the community, thank you for everything that you guys did to get power back on. Mike, you always have a plan for stuff like this. And I've asked this of the police chief, I've asked this of the fire chief. So you have a plan, but you'd never really know until you get into the middle of it. Did you like how the plan played out?
Well, I think certainly from an operational perspective and getting after the issue at hand, the response that was underway, the immediacy of it, calling in crews, calling in other co-ops to come and help. We just got to give a hats off and a pat on the back to our operations department for a job well done there. And, Angela came in early on the comms side. She was in at, I think, 2:30 in the morning on that Saturday morning. That's just immediate response. There's just something, when you're around this after, and seen a number of these over the years, your radar just goes up. You kind of keep your eye on the sky and you respond accordingly.
I slept through the whole thing. Angela, you were here in 2012 with Beltrami Electric.
Yes.
This one, to me anyway, is way worse.
Definitely way worse, yes.
How important is it to get word out as far as, in the initial response of safety and avoiding downed wires and who to call and when to call and that kind of stuff. But then as you transition into, getting power back on, how important is getting the word out?
Yeah, it really is critical. The safety part of it, from anything from the down lines and staying away to not using a generator, correctly, and backfeeding the lines. That's super dangerous as well for our crews. And then just, continuing to share helpful information about, what do you do with the food in your fridge or the food in your freezer, in and amongst providing critical updates to everyone who's sitting at home with no lights on, what they can expect, where we're at, what we're doing. It was just such a huge area that was hit, wasn't just a central location. So, we serve 3,000 square miles. So there was pockets all over that 3,000 square miles, starting in about Turtle River, moving south. We do reach all the way to Waskish, but luckily the northern part of our territory didn't see any damage.
Mike, what is the initial rollout of responding to something like this?
Well, this case was a little bit more extensive than usual because it involved transmission as well. We get our transmission from North Dakota, where Minn Kota Power, our power supplier, which is also an electric co-op, they do the big stuff, right? They generate and transmit electricity on the high voltage transmission lines. Well, they were impacted as well, and so were neighboring co-ops to the west. So it was kind of a ripple effect, and so we had a lot of transmission lines out. And so first, our crews had to coordinate with the Minn Kota crews. We had, I think, all but 3 substations out, if I recall correctly, as a result of this outage,
Yes.
and that's all related to transmission. So before we can begin restoring it locally at the distribution level, our crews had to work with Minn Kota to make sure that all of those feeds were restored or rerouted to the substations, so then that we could start really kind of assessing the exact damage on our system. So this was more extensive than usual because of that reason.
And just so I'm following, transmission line comes in, that's like your fuel line?
It's like the interstate highway. So if you think of an interstate highway, a 4-lane highway, and then that comes, and at some point then you're going to get off that interstate, and you're going to go to maybe a U.S. highway, a 2-lane highway, then down to a county road or a county highway, something like that. So transmission does the high voltage transmission that we can't supply you that high of voltage in your home, otherwise it would be unsafe. So at every step, the substation drops down that voltage, if you will, and then from the substation we take it. We distribute it. We distribute it out to the countryside then locally, and so you drop that voltage at each step of the way, so that by the time it gets to your home and you plug into that 120 volt outlet, it's safe. You're talking 69,000 volts or over 100,000 volts on some of these transmission lines. So that's what was impacted, is that high voltage, that interstate highway system, if you will.
How proud are you that generally speaking, it was on for the vast majority of your customers within a day.
Well, I see Angela smiling, and rightly so. We're certainly proud of the entire effort, but not in a prideful way. Does that make sense? I mean, certainly the camaraderie, the ability of everybody to come together, to work together. I mean, we had people in the office in there at 4 or 5 in the morning making meals for the crews before they went out. Yeah, so they could have a good hearty breakfast, packing their lunch boxes. And then at the end of the day, when the crews came back, 9, 10 o'clock at night, we had dinner, we had supper ready for them. So everybody, really took part in this effort. And I mean, a lot of people saw the line crews and the work that they did in the countryside, just clearing the tangled messes that were out there. But there's so much that's involved. And yes, I think as an organization, everybody really came together.
The support staff behind the scenes.
In a fashion that was just hard to explain, but yes, very humbling in a sense of it was an awesome experience, I guess, to come together that way.
I think what I would say that I'm most proud of is that through this whole week-long ordeal, there was no incidents, there was no accidents, there was no injuries. Everybody worked safe, and it's always a dangerous job, but when you are restoring power with lines tangled through trees and you've brought in crews that aren't familiar with your area and your system and you're all working together, it's a heightened level of danger. And so they did meet every morning and talk about, it's most important to be safe rather than quick. So we always say, they want to restore power as safely and efficiently as possible, and our guys really did that this time, and gals. So.
The fire chief was in last week, and he said that there are state organizations that respond to stuff like this, and he said there were, the fire chief from Bloomington was here acting as the fire chief for a while so that our chief, who's also the emergency operations director for the city, could just focus on that. What's the process like for a power utility to calling in help from other neighboring entities?
Yeah, so we really have, one of our core values is cooperation among cooperatives, and we are our own network. So we have a mutual aid system that's unlike anything else. I mean, it's for co-ops that are around us, if they're not, if they don't have any damage on their lines, they'll send crews. We had 5 additional co-ops that sent crews and equipment and brought material with them to use, and it really makes all the difference.
One thing that I have always wondered, why there aren't more buried power lines in northern Minnesota, not necessarily for the summertime storms. Yeah, we get those, but it seems like you're always dealing with ice storms in the winter up here. Is that just because the infrastructure is kind of old?
Well, I think there's different ways to answer that question. I will tell you this: Beltrami Electric and Beltrami Electric members of the co-op are very fortunate that 76% of the Beltrami Electric system is underground. That far and away leads the state of Minnesota, at least among electric cooperatives, rural electric cooperatives. The board of directors from years ago at Beltrami Electric, you got to give them a tip of the cap to them, because they made those decisions years ago to put those lines underground. But it's an investment. It's a significant investment for an electric co-op, especially that serves in rural areas where there are lots of lines to run and not a lot of people per mile to help share that cost. So it's a long-term investment. And again, those decisions to make those long-term investments occurred 40, 50 years ago, the start of those. But a lot of electric utilities didn't make those decisions, so they still have a lot of overhead line today. It's less expensive, at least up front, to build overhead line than it is to plow it underground. Now, some of those costs are starting to even out a little bit more so over time. But those overhead lines are certainly more exposed. But Beltrami Electric's goal is to get 100% of the lines underground. Now, that's going to take a few more years yet, because you don't do it all at once. It's like buying a car. You pay for that over time, right? And so it's the same with an electric distribution system. It's the same with our state highway system, right? You have to pay initially for that upfront investment to build it, but then you have to maintain it as well. So you balance all that out over time, and then you balance out the costs that are associated with that, so that you as a member don't have to pay for it all today. It's all factored in and amortized over time so that people share in those costs over the course of many, many years.
So you're telling us this could have been way worse.
It could have been. It
Yes.
could have been. It could have been way worse. Yeah. And the areas that were impacted, some of the areas on our system, were those areas of overhead line where it's going across country, where it's off road, where access is even more difficult to get to. It's one thing to have lines along right of ways, along roadways, but when you're inland and when you're cutting through a swath of woods, now you've got both sides that are going to get impacted as a result of a storm. And it was a tangled mess.
I know that a lot of tree enthusiasts don't like it when they see your crews out trimming trees around lines. This is why that's done, right?
This is why that's done.
Yes, that in safety. If a tree comes in contact with a power line, that tree can become energized. And if you have kids climbing or playing around trees, they could get electrocuted. It's someone in the yard trying to trim a tree that's touching a power line. It's really a safety issue, both for our crews and the general public.
What's next? You guys can't, just because the power's back on doesn't mean you guys are done.
No, far from it. We're going to have weeks of repairs. We've, through the system to get everybody back on, we did a lot of temporary switching and work. So now we're going to be going back in and making the permanent repairs to the areas that were damaged. And it's just going to take some time. That in and amongst, we are expecting additional outages. Trees can continue to fall. And with a lightning storm like we saw on the 21st, lightning travels to the ground. That's electricity wants to travel to ground. And it will travel to the power lines, and it will sit and it will burn a pinhole into underground power lines, and we start seeing underground faults occur. We've had a couple already, and we probably will see more throughout the summer. And those also take considerable time to locate, dig up, repair.
If it's buried in the ground, how do you find that?
Yeah,
there is technology.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It can locate the faults. It can locate where that feed is no longer active.
Yeah. What takes the longest time with an underground fault is that once they locate it, we don't immediately start digging. We are like any other utility. We go for state one, and we wait for a locate, because we are not the only utility in that corridor. So we have to have natural gas lines, cable lines, phone lines, different things located before we can start to dig up our equipment and make those repairs. And sometimes locators, are based in a large area, so they've got a couple-hour drive to get here. So that really plays a factor in the restoration time for underground faults.
I realize this isn't you, it's Gopher State, but everyone should be calling to locate lines when they're dealing
Absolutely.
with trees in their property.
Yeah.
Are there enough locators for the job that they're going to have here for the next handful of weeks?
I think so. In our area, they contract with cooperative development in Technology Park, and they have quite a few locators. It's the other utilities that may need to send in additional help. And it's not just existing faults, but people that are still going to be removing trees, pulling up those trees. Those root systems could already be entangled and have grown into utilities underground. So it's very important that if they're going to start pulling up large tree systems, to make sure they have a locate done, so that they're aware that there's utilities in those areas, because it is definitely a safety hazard.
I will speak for myself. I don't like it every month when I get that electric bill. But when you don't have power and I had it back within a couple hours, there are people who were into late last week. You just realize how you take for granted the fact that you plug something in, you flip that switch on, the power's there. So I know that you probably dealt with some frustration from some people, but serious tip of the hat to what you guys did.
Thank you. Largely, we got to give credit back to the membership as well, though, for their patience and for their understanding. I think certainly they saw it firsthand too, the devastation. So that certainly does factor in. But to your point, it is really it is something that oftentimes we do take for granted, because we've just grown up with that convenience, that luxury, if you will, of being able to flip that switch and have the lights turn on whenever we want to. It's only in circumstances like this when we realize the value of that we need something that's going to charge our batteries. We need something that's going to heat our coffee in the morning or keep our beverages cold. Our favorite beverages after we're out chainsawing trees all afternoon. Something like that. So, it is it's essential. It's essential to life. But sometimes we don't think about that, and we forget about how much it costs for a cup of coffee, and the fact that sometimes, depending on the type of coffee you buy, you're spending more on a cup of coffee in a day than you are on your electricity over the course of 24 hours. Put that in perspective a little bit, and it's because you don't see it. You don't see it or feel it. Thankfully, you don't feel it. But it's an essential part of our lives, absolutely.
Mike, Angela, again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you.